You train frequently, you care about your health, but you want your best return on your time in the gym. So should you be including Zone 2 as part of your weekly routine, or is it just another hype? Now this video isn't aimed at someone who doesn't train. It is for the person who is already going to the gym 4 or 5 times a week, is conscious about their nutrition, tries to prioritize their sleep, tries to also manage their stress as much as possible within the modern life. However, sadly they do not have all the hours under the sun. Likely they have a high pressure job, but they still want to make sure that they are optimizing their health, because obviously health is a long-term goal for most of us. And that is why I think you should consider including Zone 2 training into your weekly routine. So let's get on to why is Zone 2 so good and what is it? Now the body likes to use fat as its main energy source. The reason being is that fat is densely packed with a lot of energy, and it is the predominant form of storage of energy within the body. However, when it comes to using fat as an energy source, it can be a bit time consuming. So depending on how intense the activity is and the energy demand at that one particular moment, then determines whether we can use fat. However, that is where Zone 2 training comes in, because in a nutshell, Zone 2 training allows us to lift the bar for when we can use fats for energy, and just allows us to be more energetic within the majority of activities that we are doing. But there are a few key things that we need to understand when it comes to Zone 2. One of them is the mitochondria, and it is a buzzword, but you may be familiar with the fact that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It is where the majority of the energy is produced in the form of ATP, which is the energy currency that we use within the body. And the goal of Zone 2 training is to increase the size and functionality of these mitochondria, which then gives you a greater ability to use fat for as long as we can before another energy system comes in for that activity. So now you know that Zone 2 training allows us to use fats for longer, gives us a greater energy utilization for a lot of the processes that we are doing, then it will probably sell you that you need to include this within your weekly routine. And that's what happens with a lot of people. They see the benefits, so they try and implement it as soon as possible. But there are a few mistakes that people make when it comes to including Zone 2 training into their routine, because there is a bit more than what meets the eye. So Zone 2 training normally revolves around aerobic training. That is running, cycling, swimming, rowing. And when you go into these things, especially from a lifting background like I did, and it was quite competitive, you go into these, so for a run, for example, you would go in and you would be jogging too quick. But Zone 2 is a weird area that is not too light, however, not too difficult. So trying to achieve that whilst having maybe a bit of an ego at the time is something that a lot of people struggle. So they normally go too high, and they are then training other energy systems and not using the fat for the main energy source, and not improving the mitochondrial function or density like we said earlier. And then there are a few individuals who've mastered getting into Zone 2, however they don't stay in it for a long enough time. And to get the full benefits from Zone 2 training, you need to make sure that you are consistently within that zone for as long as possible. Now, having heard of the common mistakes, how do we rectify it? So I'll go into how to do it, where you should do it, and how frequently you should include it within your weekly routine. Now for me, one of the most important things is where should you do Zone 2 training. Like I said, it involves running, swimming, cycling, rowing, anything that's training your aerobic capacity. But when you do these activities outside, so if you go for a run outside in a local village or town, then you have to factor in weather, traffic, uphill, downhill gradients. There's a lot of variables that you cannot control. So that is why I always advise anyone to do it indoors, because if you are on a treadmill, for example, you can set the speed, the gradients every single time. And once you become familiar with your Zone 2, which I'll come on to in a bit, then you can go straight into your Zone 2 level and be in there for as long as possible. And then that gives you the greatest return when it comes to time in the gym. Now, besides finding the right environment, you then need to find the best modality of Zone 2, because people have different tolerabilities to certain activities. So for example, it's easier for me to do Zone 2 when cycling as opposed to running, and it might be the inverse for someone else. So make sure that you are finding that correct modality for your Zone 2. Let's move on to how do you know whether you are in Zone 2. Now, a lot of people do have a lot of modern fitness wearables. I'm not one of them, but if you are, most of them will tell you when you are in Zone 2. So you can just use that. It's quite easy. It's reasonably accurate. However, for the majority of people that aren't using them, and for people like me, I do something called the breathing test or the talk test. The talking test is one basically where you can hold a conversation, however, you wouldn't be able to sing or if you were on the phone to someone, they would be able to tell that you are doing some activity. You are able to complete sentences. However, you would like the other person to do the majority of the talking. Now, I understand doing that within a fully crowded gym, you might look a bit weird. So you can do something called a breathing test. And the idea is that you should be able to nasally breathe throughout the whole activity, but just be on the border where you might need to use your mouth. You don't want to use your mouth, but that is signaling that you are at the top of zone 2, just about to go into zone 3. So them two things, the talk test and the breath test, if you are not using a fitness wearable, are the best ways to know whether you are in zone 2. Obviously, the gold standard is to use a lactate test, which is on your ear, but you're not going to do that within your normal gym. I've never done it either. And lastly, how often should you be doing this? Now, I would say with anything, as long as you are doing something, it is better than nothing. However, you want specifics. So I would say a minimum of 30 minutes, and you are trying to go towards a total of 150 minutes per week. Now, the evidence suggests that these sessions of 45 minutes and above give you the greatest return. So that's where I would be. But again, it just needs to fit within your schedule. It is also ideal to spread them out 2 to 3 times per week, as opposed to doing the 150 or however many minutes you're able to do in one session. But like always, it is better to do something than nothing at all. But the ideal would be 150 minutes, and you would probably do it in 2 45-minute sessions and a 1-hour session. That would give you the greatest return. So that's why I was saying earlier, it is vital that you get into zone 2 as quickly as possible, because you don't want to be wasting a long period of time within the gym not being in zone 2, because that 150 minutes is actually when you're in zone 2, not when you start the workout, warm up to it, and then do zone 2 and then have a bit of a cool down. It is all zone 2 training. So the quicker you get into it, the quicker you can optimize your health and the quicker you can get out of it. Hopefully by this point you see that zone 2 is actually something you should be including within your weekly routine. The only sad thing is that it's another component that you have to add in to then make sure that you are optimizing your health. It is something that I include on a weekly basis, but I do find it difficult sometimes because it's not my favorite type of training. However, I'm doing it more for the health benefit. As with all my videos, it's for informational purposes only. And before each zone 2 workout, I always make sure I do a 10-minute mobility just to get myself warmed up. So if this is something that you would also be interested in, I will put the video up somewhere around here because I'm getting better at this. And I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.